My paranormal experiences have changed the way I look at the world. On a regular basis, I visit a certain area of woods where I found a lot of healing prior to this particular encounter or experience that we're going to talk about. It was much, much different and not in a good way. I had been out of the military for a while and I was finding a lot of healing, but I wasn't finding my way back into society. So I was taking a lot of time and investing it in the woods. And for a very, very long time, nothing happened. But then it started to, and it started with Sasquatch. And that will become important later on. On this particular day, I had been invested in Bigfoot for quite a while up to this point and been visiting these particular woods quite often, probably for about 7 or 8 years at this point, and almost daily for a number of those years. And it was always very, very positive and very healing and very special. This particular encounter actually happens across 2 different days. I'll set the tone for both days. They were both midday, both overcast, not raining, but very, very dark, dark skies to the point where you imagine something nocturnal or could even be comfortable outside in the middle of the day. It was different. The air was different. It was thicker. There was an uneasy feeling in the air. And I didn't think much of it. I just went about my business. And the first time I encountered what I would categorize it as a rake or a crawler. It was very different than the second day. So we'll go back to the first day. And I had been in these woods for a while that day, and I'm looking across the woods in this general area, and I noticed something, and it's just observing me. And if anybody's ever seen Lord of the Rings, there's this thing called Gollum, and it very much looked like that. And it was very, I'm going to go ahead and just kind of portray what I think it was feeling and thinking, just off appearances, that it was unsure of itself. It wasn't that strong for some, that day. It just was weak and very, very, very unsure is the best way I could put it, and very observant. And when it noticed that I noticed it, it ran across the woods fairly quickly, and similar to like a frog and a spider mixed. Let's put it that way. And it scurried across into this underground system, right? And there's like this cave entrance at the side of the woods that goes into these huge old government buildings with, there's known underground tunnels and then a sub-basement tunnel too. And then God knows what's below that, but I'm assuming that's where this creature lurks. Now, mind you, I made it out of there fine, and I kind of brushed it off and went about my business, and I stayed away from it for quite a while. And then nothing went on in that area for a long time, and I got a little more sure of myself, and, many sunny days go by, and positive experiences, and then I find myself there again, standing in almost the same spot, same scenario, overcast, thick clouds, dark clouds, no sunshine, no, moving air, nothing, everything's just dull. And I had just come from the spot where it was standing the first time, and I had to. There was a lot of downed trees and a lot of big logs and things that were in the way, and it took me a good amount of time to cross from that point to where I was, and it was probably only 100 yards, give or take, but it was maybe even less than 100 yards, but it was hard for me to do. I remember at one point I actually had to take my pack off and, put my back up against one of the downed trees and roll over it because it was it was just too much for me to step up onto and leap over that way. So there was a lot of thorns and very, very, very thick, nasty stuff. There's no trails down there. So I get to the other side and I turn back and I see that thing again. This time it's not unsure of itself. Does not look weak at all. I can see it clear as day because now it's out. It's not hiding itself at all. It's not going to scurry off. It is feeling cocky and strong. And it had these veins. I remember the veins. You could see almost like stuff pulsing through them, like blood going through them or whatever. But they were like purple and blue and red, and like they weren't like set in the skin. It's almost like they were raised on top of the skin. And its skin was a pale white with like a gray combination, almost like if you were to look at the moon at night, a full moon at night, and just see the white and the gray spots on it, like very, very similar to that. And it just had these deep holes for eyes, like similar to a gray alien photograph, I suppose, just these sockets. It's just, I don't remember seeing eyeballs. And it wasn't as weak looking. It looked like it had somehow been like working out or something. It was just very strong and sure of itself, and almost like a guy after a workout, how he's like pumped up. And I knew at this point that it was gonna make a move, but I didn't have many options. I don't carry a weapon. The hill to the side of me on the right, I can't go forward or backward, because behind me and to the right of me is this huge hill. And to get up and down that one, to get up it, I usually have to, if I go out that way, which I usually don't, I have to take my hands and literally, if I'm lucky, dig them in the side of the hill and put them all the way in the dirt. And, there's chiggers and all sorts of stuff in there. And, it just, you get an allergic reaction from touching the top of it. Forget about putting your hands right in it. And if you're lucky, you make it up without sliding down. It's covered in leaves, and to the other side is a long way out, and I have to make my way over a bunch of stuff that's pretty much impenetrable. Thorns, all sorts of interweaving thorns and stuff like that. Vines, a lot of vines. And at this point, I guess I was just kind of hoping in some way that it was going to go and do what it did the last time. But at the same time, I knew it was going to come for me. And I also knew that there was going to be nothing I could do about it. At this point, it decides to start its forward progress towards me. And it was the same track I had just took. Pretty much the same exact, trajectory I was just on, I suppose is a good way to put it. But my human efforts were not the same struggle for this thing. And it did similar movement to the first time, like a frog spider type thing, but it was more tactical and more fluid and more, again, sure of itself. At one point, I remember there was two saplings that were about maybe my wingspan apart, maybe about 5 feet apart. And I remember seeing it climbing over the logs like I had rolled over like it was nothing. And it took its hands, it spread its arms out and grabbed two saplings and pulled itself forward like a self-projecting slingshot. And it could kick off of trees and pull itself off of things just like an amphibian jumping off of lily pads or a spider zigzagging through a web. Very, very similar to both things, but it weighs about 300 pounds, give or take. I'm 220. I'm 5'7", 220 pounds. And this was about 6 foot 300. If I had to guess, again, there could be a 50-pound give or take there. And probably a 6-inch give or take there too. It's hard to say for sure. And as I'm watching these movements and registering what I just was capable of doing compared to what it is capable of doing, I remember saying to myself, oh, that's it. This is it. You know, I looked around and looked at my options, looked back at it, looked around at my options, looked at it, and how fast it was moving and how tactfully it was moving. And I just remember just saying to myself, this is it. And it's hard. My last job was a soldier, and, we're not built to accept defeat, but that was what I guess my reaction was in that moment, was that, here it comes. And so it's a weird thing to look back on and think about. It's like a speeding car coming right at you and you know you don't have enough time to get out of the way. It's kind of just you make your peace for those couple of seconds. And as it got close, I started to just really see muscle definition and speed and movement so close up that I was speechless. I don't think I know for a fact I did not say a word. I didn't make a peep. I didn't make a move. I didn't even shuffle my feet at all. No flinching. There was nothing on my end. Now, does that chalk up to something on that creature's end? Maybe it had some kind of control on me. I don't think so, because I was processing things, and I was looking for outs, and I think I just understood that there was no option. When it got closer, would I probably have put up a fight? I can't say for sure. At this point, it's within 50 feet. And all of a sudden, out of my left peripheral, because I'm just kind of in a daze. I don't know if I'm even looking. I'm probably just blank staring in that direction. Out of my left peripheral, to the right is a huge hill. Behind me is a huge hill. And then to my left is the thick brush. And just to my left, out of my peripheral, I just see something appear. And I look up. I don't think I turned my head. If I did, I don't remember. But yeah, I did slightly turn my head and look up. And there was a familiar face. and I looked way up. This was a familiar face, a familiar Sasquatch. I call him Bubba. It's not his given name, but that's what I called him. Kind of stuck, when people go into jail and have to get the big guy in jail, go get that guy Bubba. Like, it just is a joke that evolved and ended up sticking. And Sasquatch appeared out of nowhere. He didn't walk up. He just was there. I don't have an answer for exactly how. I just know he was standing there in the physical, it was physical enough for me to reach out and touch him. I'd say my shoulder comes up to his waist. That's what I mean. I was looking up at him. And I remember this, like a train whistle can't shine a light on this sound that came out of his mouth. And I don't remember him opening his mouth per se to do it. I don't remember if I was looking necessarily, but it was a vocal. And it was you would expect something that size to yell, if it yelled out, like at least in my opinion, you would expect something deep and guttural and scary, but it was not. It was the highest of noises I have ever heard. And it was smooth and like a train whistle, but super loud. And he aimed at that crawler thing. And when he lined it up perfectly with that creature that was running at me, it was like a 50 cal bullet hit this thing dead in the chest. It stopped its momentum dead in its tracks. It actually went backwards and tumbled a couple of times, like it ripped it off of its own feet and sent it flying backwards, crashing into the ground. And he just continued to aim this vocal at the Rake or crawler or whatever, as if it was guiding it back into that place where it went into the last time. Let me make this clear too, because this part always blows my mind. Not that there's not a lot here to blow your mind already, I'm sure, but I know that this is the loudest thing I've ever heard, and I know that it's a weapon to an extent, and I know it's strong enough that it took that thing off its feet, and I can tell it's the loudest thing in the world, but at the same time, I'm standing right next to him, and it's not hurting my ears. And that's just something that I always remembered, because it was clearly something that could be projected in a direction, and not just like if we scream, like everybody hears it and everything hears it in a 360. But this was something that was directed and funneled where it wanted to go, and only to that place. And that's exactly what he did. It was almost as if I could see a laser beam coming from Cyclops from X-Men. Like, how he takes off his glasses and, shoots that beam. It was almost like that. Almost like I could see what was coming, what was there. There was no visual, but it was almost like I could tell that that's what was going on. And again, this thing took off like somebody was tasing it in the rear the whole time it was running. Like, just frantically scattering, trying to get back, and it was disoriented, and it was running through the stuff pretty smoothly, but not tactically. It was like frantic, like it was so scared and so outnumbered, or outmatched is what I should say, that it just could not wait to get out of there. Was it being hurt by it? I don't know. Was it in fear? I don't know much more. I don't know if it was in fear of what could else happen or what was happening. I'm not going to pretend like I understand that deeply. I can just tell you what I experienced, and it went for that, what I call it the Rake cave, because I don't know what else purpose it has. It's just a huge mouth in the side of this hill that goes under these old buildings and leads out into the woods, and nobody goes out there except this guy, and it's, there's no trails back there. There are some bike trails nearby, but this all falls on technically federal property, so there's nobody out there. And now the Sasquatch, now Bubba, is taking his vocals, and the best way I can explain it is like, if you wanted to clear a house of something paranormal, you would like sage, and you'd want to like take the sage and bring it into every corner and touch it in all the different places and get it all used up. And it was like he kept just aiming this vocal and panning it back and forth like he was cleaning or cleansing the area. And that's the best thing I could think of that it was doing. Maybe someone else has a better, or a different insight on it. Maybe I'm too close to the experience to see what was really happening, but that's all I could come up with even to date. Is that maybe it was just cleaning the area, or maybe there was something left over that needed to be, dispersed of that I didn't see. Something non-physical. I just don't know. And I got the message, if you will. It's time to go. Get out of here. It's time to go. And I'm just standing there in shock. I go and I do what I did before. I look to my right, and I already know what's to my left, and I kind of look again out of the corner of my eye, and I can instantly get this feeling that, no, not this way. So I go and I turn to the right, and I go to start digging my hands into the side of the hill to make my way up. And I've done this numerous times because I didn't want to go walk all the way back through because it was hot or it was snowing, or, I didn't want to hike all the way back through the other way. So I would just rough it and dig my way up this, hill and go out that way. So I go to dig my hands in and start making my way up the hard way. And unexplainably, again, I don't have a way to explain this. It was like, almost like I was put on a escalator or something and just lifted to the top. Just lifted right to the top of the hill. As soon as I realized that I was being lifted up, I was on top of it. In the same moment I realized what was going on, I was there. Not enough time to register exactly what went down or how it happened. But again, I just tell you what happened. I continued to stand there in shock / disbelief / can't believe I'm alive. And out of the corner of my eye again, and then in my ear, even though it's again not hurting still, I can hear him still doing this screaming. Back and forth and back and forth. Almost like he's continually, maybe he was keeping it in there or keeping things away while I escaped. Or while he helped me escape. I sat with that for a while, and there's a lot of things I don't still understand to this day. And, yeah, that was my paranormal experience, and that's how it changed my world.
My paranormal experiences shaped my view of the world. So one of the first paranormal experiences that I had that really shook me to my core was in the summer of 2001 or 2002. It is hard for me to remember exactly which summer it was because so many of those summers blurred together in my memory, but that moment really does stand out. My brother and I, he was 3 years younger than me, still is, and we were playing outside. Now, we lived in the woods in upstate New York, right along the Pennsylvania border. It was a hop and a skip to get over to Pennsylvania, and we did it often for shopping, eating, what have you. Where we lived, there was a swamp across from the dirt road, and we would routinely go over to watch the beavers swimming in the swamp or watch the cranes and all the other creatures that would come to take a drink or to take a swim. And it was wonderful. It was the best of both worlds. We had kind of this swampy wilderness across the way, and then we had these really deep woods that we could play in behind and surrounding our entire house. In fact, when Google Earth came out, we decided to look for our house, and you could only see our plot because it was carved out of the woods. So we were playing on the dirt road, as we did often. It was a very quiet dirt road. Rarely did we have to move aside for a car. And my brother and I, while we were playing, we were contemplating, should we go in for lunch? It's about time to go in for lunch. I remember thinking, I'm starting to get hungry. It's got to be about lunchtime. And it was a beautiful summer day. I mean, absolutely the best summer day to be playing outside in New York. And we heard a noise, a very loud, sort of like shuddering noise. And we looked up to where the noise was coming from. And there was this very large shape. When we first perceived it, it was this very large shape that was coming down out of the sky and swooping down toward the road. And my brother and I panicked. We both panicked. Not a sound, very freeze response out of both of us. And suddenly I saw it was coming nearer, and I grabbed my brother. I threw us both into the tree line. And we watched as this creature swooped down along the tree line, parallel to the dirt road, and went right overhead. And the dirt road itself is a back road. So it's not necessarily as wide as some roads might be, but it's definitely about 10 to 12 feet wide. This thing had a wingspan that extended at least 10 to 12 feet past the road on each side. So you've got that 10 feet in the middle and then 10 to 12 feet on both sides. It was huge. And we both just stared at it in awe as it passed over. And when it first passed over, we really couldn't get a good sense of its color, its shape. We just knew it was a giant bird at first. As it decided to fly over and kept going, it kind of lifted back up into the sky after swooping down, like it had changed its mind or something. It goes up And at that point, we got to look at it. It was almost like a grayish brown color. And that's when we realized it wasn't really a bird. It looked more like what we had seen of pterodactyls in books. So it had a tail that didn't necessarily have traditional like bird plumage. And it had kind of a weird shaped head, and it just kept flying away. And we just kind of stayed in the trees. I don't know how long. I didn't have a watch, but we waited until we were darn sure that thing was gone before we headed up through the tree line. We knew where our house was from that point. We headed up through the trees and tried to stay under tree cover as long as possible. And when we got to where the tree line ended near our house, we did a double, triple, quadruple check and hightailed it into the house. We didn't even want lunch right away. It took us a while to get our appetites back after that. It was absolutely terrifying being in the presence of something that huge, and fully understanding that if it had wanted to swoop down and grab, say, my brother, he was smaller than me at 3 years younger. If it had wanted to grab him, it easily could have grabbed him and carried him off. So we did not play outside for the rest of that summer. I would say for periods lasting longer than maybe an hour, and it was almost always in the woods. We didn't play on the road. We didn't ride our bikes. It took us almost that summer to recover from the situation and want to go out and play again. And my brother and I didn't speak of it frequently, mostly because the whole incident had really scared us. But occasionally we would just kind of touch base with each other. Did that happen? Did we actually see that? And I've never been more grateful that my brother was there for that experience. I mean, I love my brother and we get along really well, even to this day. But having him there and having me there helped us understand that what we experienced actually happened. We both have the same memories. We both have the same understanding of what happened. And we both had similar feelings in that situation. We didn't talk to our parents about it, mostly because we didn't want them to say that we were crazy or that we had active imaginations. But several years later, and this is the interesting bit, we were watching something on TV with our dad. And our dad is not he's not a silly man. He's a very serious man. He's very much a man's man kind of guy. And he enjoys hunting, fishing, being outdoors. And he has since his youth. We're watching this program with him, and they're talking about Thunderbirds. And we all three just start watching this program. And I can tell that my brother is thinking the same thing that I am, which is, that's what we saw. But they keep describing bird, Thunderbird, Thunderbird. And only as they go on in the program and say that some people have seen more of a pterodactyl-like creature, more so than a bird, did we realize, holy cow, we did see one of these things. Our dad surprises us and says, you know, I saw one of those when I was younger. And we said, you did? And he said, yeah. He said, I saw one pass overhead. He said, biggest thing I've ever seen. He says, thought it was a small plane at first, but it was one of those. That's where he left it. He didn't expand. He didn't elaborate on the experience. It was just matter of fact for him. And that's when my brother and I felt safe to share our story. And he said, well, you know, it only happened a couple miles away from where we live now in the woods. And it's just interesting to me that when you hear about a lot of these stories, at first I thought most of them were out west. But when I started doing my own research into it, when I became older and I started really looking into it to understand more, there have been several sightings in Pennsylvania. So it's not much of a stretch of the imagination to think that maybe it came up our way, you know, maybe a change of scenery. Maybe they've been seen there more frequently than we realize. But it just absolutely fascinates me to this day that I saw one of these creatures, and it's probably one of my favorite cryptids to this day, simply because of my personal interaction with it. However brief it may have been, however terrifying it may have been, but it makes me always open to the possibility of what else might be out there that we don't necessarily understand, or what science hasn't conventionally told us is true and present. That's my Thunderbird story. Beyond the Thunderbird, my family has always been a highly spiritual family. Ghosts are not something that are considered odd. They are not considered abnormal or something to be feared. In most cases, we consider them a welcome sign. And for a lot of the women in my family, myself included, we get a lot of signs that someone either has passed or will be passing soon. One of my favorites, and that, I use that term gently, it's never a favorite thing when somebody passes away. But one of my favorite stories was my own experience. My sister-in-law, 27 years old. This was October of 2021. I was working from home. I had my baby in tow. She was about a little over a year old. And my husband was at work. So it was just me, the baby, and our dogs and our cat. And I'm in the house. My sister-in-law has been in the hospital. She was diagnosed with COVID, and her prognosis was going up and down and up and down. She had had a very good night, and they thought that things were looking really well for her. And I was completely caught off guard that day when I felt an energy shift in my home. It felt like all of a sudden the room, the open floor plan of my house was just filling with people. My dogs were nervous wrecks. They cannot stand company. So they're going crazy. The baby is waving and smiling and acting very friendly. And I'm trying so hard. I'm working so hard to recognize this energy that's in my home at this time. And I don't recognize any of it. And then it hits me. This isn't anybody that I should recognize. It's all my husband's family. And all I could think is that they were stopping by to see the new baby on their way to help my sister-in-law to the other side. I sent a message to a friend who I knew would believe me. And I said, either we are going to have a cataclysmic weather event, or my sister-in-law is about to pass away. And he said, I'm sorry. He believed me wholeheartedly right out of the gate, because he knows that this isn't my first tango with this sort of thing. Sure enough, I get a call 3 hours later. After the energy has dissipated, it felt like everybody left. The party was over. About 3 hours later, I get the call from my husband that his sister has passed away. And I had cried before the call because I knew what was going to happen. And I never really know what to do with that information, because telling someone isn't going to make it better. There were no interventions that could have helped her in that moment. The doctors did everything that they could. It was going to happen regardless, whether it was fate or what have you. She was meant to go at that time, and she had known it. And I guess it just gives me solace to know that she had a complete army of family on her side to help her pass on. One more story that I would like to tell, and again, I have many, many stories to tell, but one of my favorites, my grandmother, before she had passed, for years was pestering me, you need to have a baby. You need to have a baby. I need to meet that baby. You need to have a baby. She had done childcare for years. She watched my brother and I and many other children her entire life. Childcare was really a passion for her. Everything I've learned about child rearing, the basics at least, and tips and tricks for teething and such, I learned from my grandmother. And I have used a lot of that with my children, and they've all been helpful. You know, it's not like whiskey on the gums or any of that. It's little things like when they're teething, give them a cold washcloth, or when they have gassy tummies, do this with their feet, and it will help. And all those little wisdoms, some of them just, they're timeless. So, she loved babies. She wanted me to have a baby. I was not ready for a baby. Well, Grandma passed away in 2016, and I still had no baby. But my husband and I decided in 2019, okay, we're ready now. We're going to start trying for a baby. And one morning, I woke up and came out into the kitchen to make my morning tea. And the light is streaming into the kitchen. It's very bright. And as I go around the corner, I see this very short shadow figure standing in my kitchen. And it may not be everybody's normal response, but again, my family's very spiritual and we've had a lot of experiences. And so I said, well, who are you? I said this out loud. I said, who are you? And about the time that the figure faded, I realized who was standing in front of me. It was my grandmother. It was her exact height and her exact feel. And I knew what she was telling me. And I smiled and I made my tea. And I went back into the bedroom and I said, I just saw my grandmother in the kitchen. And my husband says, the dead one? I said, yeah. And he said, well, that's weird. And I said, no, I think we're going to have a baby. And he said, well, that would be nice. And my husband, he's a big believer too, but he doesn't like to acknowledge it for fear of giving it power. Sure enough, 11 or 12 days later, I got my positive pregnancy test. So before the pregnancy test told me that I would have a baby, my grandmother showed up to let me know that I was finally going to give her her baby. And the funniest bit for me is that she hasn't stopped hanging around. She still stops in pretty frequently. My favorite thing that she does is that she will grab my husband's foot and shake it if he starts to fall asleep when he's supposed to be watching our kid. If he just, has a dad nod off, she will just grab his foot full on and just yank. And he always knows it's her because it's always his feet. That's always her target. And I just let him know that is so on brand for her. And when we would try to put the baby to sleep, sometimes the baby would start playing. And I would say, Grandma, you have to let this baby go to sleep. We need her to get her rest. If you would like to help, we'd love that. And then the baby would just fall asleep and we'd lay her down. And so it was almost like we were getting this ghostly help. My baby was the best sleeper ever. And I never bragged because I didn't want it to go away. And I didn't, want to say what helped sometimes because, again, not everybody's going to believe it. But if you see it, it's kind of hard to deny it. And that's pretty much my favorite kind of stories of the things that I've encountered. Aside from the ghostly interactions, I would say my premonitions are pretty fascinating as well. When I was a teenager, they were stronger, admittedly. I had a dream when I was in freshman year of high school that my grandfather got onto a plane. I was on a plane. My grandfather shows up on the plane. And I say, Grandpa, what are you doing on the plane? And he says, oh, I just wanted to wish you a good trip. Have a good trip. And in the dream, I was going on a plane to Paris, which I never wanted to go to Paris. That was never on my bucket list of places to go. I don't speak French. Aside from the Louvre or the catacombs, I really didn't have an interest in going. And my mother, I just felt so weird about this dream. And I said to my mother the next morning, I had this really weird dream and I told her about it. And I said, I don't know why, but it upsets me so much because I totally forgot to tell you. So at the end of the dream, I land in Paris. And my grandfather is dead. I get a call that he's dead. That was why I was upset. at the dream. My mother said, Grandpa is fine. You have no plans to go to Paris. The only international travel you're planning is to go to Puerto Rico with the Spanish Club. I said, you're right. It's just a dream. Nothing to be worried about. Well, the year rolls on and the Spanish Club trip shifts. It becomes a joint trip with the French Club. And we're going to be going to Barcelona and to Paris. And my grandfather receives a cancer diagnosis. And it's not looking good. And all these things keep adding up. And I just look at my mom and say, I'm really worried because what about that dream? And she says, oh, don't worry about it. Like, you don't even know if you're going to Paris first. You don't know how Grandpa's going to be doing. All of that. Just, it's fine. It's fine. And so it gets closer and we find out Paris is where we're stopping first. My grandfather gets progressively more ill. And by the time that I'm ready to go on the trip, he is barely verbal. He is so weak. And so I see him before I go on the trip, and it is the last time that I ever spoke to my grandfather. He did not die when I landed in Paris, but he was no longer conscious when I landed in Paris. I was never more terrified to get on a plane in my life. I have no fear of flying, but I was absolutely terrified that I was going to see my grandfather standing on that plane. Thankfully, that was not the case. He died quite peacefully, which I do have some solace in that fact. But my mother has never doubted a dream of mine again since that has happened. She's always told me, if you have a dream like that, give us warning. Please do. The scariest of my premonition dreams was that on that same dirt road that the Thunderbird story occurred on, I met up with my cousin, who was at the time 13. I was in college. Beautiful young girl. And in the dream, we're spending time with each other, and all of a sudden she's gone. And I have this sinking feeling that somebody has taken her. Somebody is doing something nefarious. And I have no way to stop it. I have no way to find her. And I am panicked the entire dream. I send a message to her because, of course, I'm away at college. She's living at the very front end of that dirt road, about maybe a quarter mile in. And I tell her, I know this sounds really stupid, but please just be extra vigilant. Like, just keep an eye out. I just felt like I needed to tell you that. And she goes, LOL, okay. Typical 13-year-old. Well, she was walking home from school one day, and her dad happened to come home early from work and see her walking down the road with a big stick in her hand. And he says, what's with the stick? She says, there's a man in the woods, and he's watching me. My uncle gets out of his truck and goes walking into the woods, and he sees a man with his pants down around his ankles. And when he sees my uncle approach, he yanks up his pants and runs away. They never got an ID on the man, but they immediately changed how my cousin got off the bus, where she got off the bus, and who was keeping an eye on her. She was never left alone from that point on until she grew up, moved out on her own. And it still gives me the icks every time I think about it. And did me telling her to be more vigilant help in that situation? I don't know. But I'm still glad that I told her to be more vigilant. And I'm very glad that nothing worse happened from it. And I see this as a gift. It's never a happy premonition. It's always been bad things, affairs, deaths, losses of various kinds, big financial issues for people that I know and love. But it's knowledge. It's information. However it's coming to me, it is helpful in some way, shape, or form. You can't just live in the light. There is darkness, and at least having warning about it allows you to prepare yourself for the fight that you have coming ahead, whether that's grief, whether that's finding a new job, whether that's healing from love that's hurt you. There's nothing wrong with having a heads up. So, yeah, all of my paranormal experiences that I've had have definitely shaped my worldview, and I wouldn't have it any other way. There's absolutely nothing in this world that you can't leave the possibility open for. And the very moment that you think everything's figured out, there's nothing left to explore, science has an explanation for everything, that's the very moment you're going to come face to face with something that's really going to make you shake in your boots. Unless, of course, you're open to it. And then you might end up having a little more fun with it, or being a little more at ease as opposed to absolutely terrified.
My name is Skeet, and I live in Northeast Tennessee. And the first thing that I would like to tell you about was an experience that happened to me back in 2008, 2009. It was in the fall of the year. I'm thinking probably September, late September, maybe early October. I know that the leaves had started falling and changing colors, but they weren't totally down. So I worked from home, and at the time I smoked cigarettes, and I would go out onto our carport to smoke. So to kind of explain the lay of the land, if you will, when I'm on my back deck, if I look out, I have my yard, and there's a meadow behind that, and then there's some woods, and then a mountain. And over to the left, we have got more woods. So our neighbor's yard goes down into, and woods start there. I was out, it was probably around 9:30, 9:45. I tried, even though I was working from home, I tried to keep a regular break schedule. And I went out to have a cigarette, and I remember it was a very crisp, cool morning. And while I was smoking, I had taken a few drags, and I was just kind of looking out into the meadow, and I heard what sounded like a woman screaming. So I stopped for a moment, and at that point in time, I just listened, and I didn't hear anything more. And so I was finishing up my cigarette, and that's when I heard what sounded like a baby crying. So now, I've got a woman that sounded like she was in distress, and then I hear what sounds like a baby crying. So I'm thinking maybe there's someone that needs help, over in the woods, or there was a hollow back in behind there. And I thought, well, I'm going to grab my hiking boots and go see what's happening. So I grabbed my boots from inside the door, and I was sitting on the wall, and I was lacing the first boot up when I heard the baby cry again, but this time at the end of it, it was very feline sounding. And I said, oh no, that's a big cat. I had heard rumors about it, growing up, as far as like a friend of mine's grandmother telling me she grew up in Southwest Virginia. And, she was told that as a child, if they heard a baby crying, not to go out at night. And my partner actually spent some time in Southwest Virginia, and also had an experience where a mountain lion had gotten under their porch, and it sounded like a baby crying. And of course they did not go out. So now I'm pretty unnerved. I go back inside. I had one boot on, one boot off, and went to the door, closed the door, locked the door, went back to work, and was very cautious when I came out for the remainder of my smokes. So a few days go by, and I want to say it was like on a Thursday or a Friday. I had gotten off work early. I'd started early and got off work a little bit early. So it was probably around 4:30. And I went out back to smoke again, and I was just kind of looking, into the woods and the trees and everything. And I caught movement out of the corner of my eye, and I look over, and there was a felled tree there. And it was a very large tree. It was very long. And I see this black shape walking, and I started looking, and I was like, that is the largest cat I've ever seen in my life. And as it keeps walking towards me, it's walking towards me now on the felled tree, I see that it is about 4 foot long. Then it also has a tail with it. It's black. It's very, short. very short fur, shiny. I could see it shining, like the light coming through the trees on it. And I'm looking at what appears to be a panther, a black panther, walking across this felled tree. And, as it took its last few steps, it kind of like went into a crouch, and it went off the right-hand side of the felled tree, and I could not see it. We had some Leyland cypresses, and that kind of blocked my view, and I got very freaked out. I completely left. I went into the house because that thing could have been on me at any point in time. The next few days, anytime I did yard work or anything like that, I was very cautious. It was just absolutely unnerving. I had friends who said, well, it was probably a Maine Coon cat. And I said, well, I know. So, this person and that person, and they have Maine Coon cats, and one is huge. It's a very large cat, but it is not that big. It's not 4 foot long. It's not completely black. It doesn't have the short fur. They usually have puffy fur, and they have a very distinct look to them. So at this point in time, there's no doubt in my mind that I saw a black panther in Northeast Tennessee, not too far from Bluntwell, Tennessee. And that is my paranormal experiences with the big black panthers.
If you've had a paranormal experience and would like to be a guest on the show, please contact us by going to myparax.com. That's myparaex.com. Thanks for listening.